Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 16th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Turford, the level 99 human archmage, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 45 doppelganger, Mr. Larrett Bland. Garret Bland's evil. No, I'm just kidding. It's Garret Bland, the level 99 elf ranger. Garret, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. This evil twin Larrett is a loser. Only level 45?
Well, he's a doppelganger.
Not even level 90. He is a doppelganger, so he's pretty weak. Man, I'm excited for this episode, Ryan.
I bet.
This is going to be good.
This is going to be a
really
Garret
good.
Bland special, let me tell you what, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, yeah.
Today we are talking all about the Atelier series, which I know Garret is very familiar with. I pretty much know nothing about the Atelier series. So I think it's going to make for a really interesting episode, and I'm excited to just learn more about it. But before we do that all, of course, there's something we do every single show. Of course, we got to clear the dungeon of the pesky mobs before we get to the raid boss, aka the Atelier series. So number one, if you like what we do and you want to support the show, there's a number of great ways you can do that. Number one, you can subscribe to us on your podcast feed of choice, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We're on all the things, so go subscribe there, and you'll be getting the show every single week. In addition to that, if you want to see our beautiful faces every single week, we do a video version of the show over at youtube.com/YouMeCapri that goes up every Saturday morning, so you can definitely go check that out there. And last but not least, if you want early access to this and all of our shows, as well as some exclusive content, which we might be teasing by the time you're listening to this, or maybe soon afterwards, wink, wink, head on over to patreon.com/YouMeCapri, and you throw a little tip jar, and then, you get some content, and it's going to be really awesome. But enough about all that. Let's get all that dilly-dallying out of the way. It's time to read from the sacred texts. And Garret, boy, oh boy, I'm excited to hear about this one. It's time to talk Atelier games, of course, and eat the hype special, as one would say, of course. In fact,
very much so.
In a lot of ways, and we kind of talked about this on the first episode, but in a way, the Atelier series was kind of like the series that was kind of the catalyst for us doing this show, because I remember like we would just, because the way this show kind of came about, and we talked about it on the first episode, was like we were just kind of goofing around on stream a couple times, like on Halo Saturdays and some other streams, and we're like joking around about the idea of doing maybe like a Vita RPG episode, because like no one talks about, for example, the Atelier games, because there's a lot of them on Vita, which we'll get to in a bit. So that ended up kind of kicking us into this idea of doing this show and kind of, pursuing this as a big show. So in a way, we kind of owe the Atelier series, a big thankful thing for actually making us get together and actually do this show every single week. So I wanted to say thank you to that for that. But Garret, start us off as always, because normally I do the fun facts. But
yes,
this is a series that you're much more familiar with than I am. So hit me with some fun facts about the series, Garret.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to go right into it. So the Atelier series is a long-standing JRPG franchise, very lighthearted JRPG. It's turn-based with the hook being a lot of alchemy and crafting systems. So I'm going to go through some of the fun facts right now. It is developed by Gust Corporation. That is their iconic, long-standing franchise. They do make other RPGs.
Because I have played a Gust game before that wasn't Atelier, because I played, there's an RPG based off the anime Fairy Tail that came out on PS4, which I actually really enjoyed. Like the combat in that game was really fun. The story was kind of like all over the place, because they were trying to stuff like 300 episodes of an anime into a 40-hour game, and it doesn't work that way.
As they always do.
But I remember that game being really fun. But anyways, go on.
Yeah. So that's one of the recent games that they made, and they also made Knights of Azure. But their long iconic franchise is the Atelier games. They were independent for a while, but they were acquired by Koei Tecmo on December 7th, 2011. For 2.2 billion yen, which is equal to 20 million USD, and 25 million in Canadian dollars for you Canadians
thank you for doing that conversion, Garret.
Yes, I had to do that for you guys. The Gust Corporation was founded in 1993, and they made a few games before the Atelier games. They had one PC game and a few PlayStation games before they dive into the Atelier games. So they were primarily made for PlayStation consoles, but now they're also on Nintendo Switch. They've also been on 3DS. They've also been on PS Vita, Windows, Steam as well. And actually they had one spin-off game on the Wonder Swan. Ever heard of that one?
Oh, I've heard of the Wonder Swan. Let me tell you what. I mean, to be fair, the Wonder Swan wasn't really like very popular at all in North America. It was very much like a Japanese centric portable system. And
yes.
I know Kelsey Lewin on Twitter, who actually runs the Pink Gorilla store in Seattle. She's like one of the only people on YouTube that ever talks about the Wonder Swan, and like even to the point where like her startup video is like the Wonder Swan kind of booting up. So
oh my goodness,
I remember learning so much about the Wonder Swan from a lot of her videos or some of the stuff on Metal Jesus Rocks' YouTube channel. So huge shout out to them for teaching me all about the Wonder Swan, which is a console I've never seen in real life before.
I had no idea this was a handheld until I dive into this, like the research of the Atelier series. But yeah, they have one spinoff in the Wonder Swan Color, and it's a handheld by Bandai, the manufacturer Bandai. So there are a total of 22 mainline games in the franchise. I feel like arguably, other than like the Neptunia games, this is like the most mainline games in a JRPG franchise.
Yeah, because like Tales was up there.
Tales is up there as well.
This, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, but like the mainline, but like Final Fantasy, even like the mainline games, they're only up to 15 of them, and with 16 coming out soon. So like, there aren't many series that can really match that, unless you're an Idea Factory game or a Compile Hearts series, I guess.
They definitely they focus on just reiterating what they already have beforehand. So it's not like a clear departure like they do a lot in Final Fantasy games or whatever. It's that's why they're able to churn out a lot of these Atelier games. So there's 22 main games, and they're divided into 7 series. So I'll just go through the names real quick. The Salberg and Grimnad series, Iris, Kimia, I don't know how to pronounce that second word.
Close enough.
Arlen series, Dusk, Mysterious, and then the most recent series is the Secret series, and they're still going on with that series. Yeah, because the first game,
what I remember, like looking into some of the Atelier games on my own, as well as like they're mostly divided into trilogies. Like I've noticed, they'll always do 3 games and then they move on to like something completely different after that, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, so there's 2 or 3 games in each of the series, which is interesting. Most recently, trilogies. The first game came out is Atelier Mary the Alchemist of Salberg, only in Japan on PS1 on May 23rd, 1997. And then 4 more games came out after that, only in Japan, and that was the Salberg and the Grimnad series.
Okay, so only in Japan.
Only in Japan. 5 games only out in Japan. The first game to come out in the U.S. is starting with Atelier Iris, Eternal Mana on the PS2. It came out in Japan in May 27th, 2004. And then almost over a year later in the U.S., June 28th, 2005. And in Europe in March 17th, 2006. So it actually took a while for these games to come out to the rest of the territories. And then ever since then, they put out all the games in Europe and North America as well. The next most notable game throughout this franchise that found more of an audience, a niche audience, is when they started the Mysterious series. And that came out on PlayStation Vita and PS4. And so they had this kind of like cross-platform going on with the Mysterious series. and then from there, they really focused on PS Vita and handheld type of consoles as well. I think what I'm going to talk about most is when I started with the games is Atelier Ryza, Ever Darkness, and the Secret Hideout, which is the first game of the latest series, the Secret series. And it came out fall 2019, kind of scattered release dates throughout various regions. And then I think what I really liked about this game, I was just very impressed with the visuals of this game. It was the first time I was like, wow, this Atelier franchise looks pretty good. Now I'm going to try it out with this game. And then the last game that came out is Atelier Ryza 2. It came out earlier this year, and then both these games are on PS4, Switch, and PC.
Yeah, I mean those games look pretty. Even like Atelier Ryza 2. Like when I looked at some of the trailers ahead of time, to kind of to prepare myself at least a little bit for this episode. I remember just like you, like the visuals looked really cool, especially for the newest game. So I'm interested to try some of these out. But so that's where you got your series. Like you basically, so what, you played Atelier Ryza the first one, and then kind of went backwards, or how did you kind of approach it from there? Like
I only really played Atelier Ryza right now, and I have actually looked into gameplay on previous games, and there's a lot of ports now of they call it the DX versions of, like, I think Dusk, Arland, and Mysterious. The previous 3 series, they're in some form or fashion on Switch, PS4, Vita, Steam. I mean, you can find a bunch of these games, and they are like not full game prices each one's, but like a trilogy is like $90.
Yeah,
and
but
so
you get 3 full games.
You get 3 full games, and these games, they're pretty long. They're like maybe 30 to 40 hour experiences on each of them. So you get a pretty good time investment.
Nice.
So for side games, there's a total of 16 side games to this franchise. A lot of them were handheld, like Nintendo DS, 3DS, Game Boy, the Wonder Swan.
Yeah, of course.
Or PlayStation Portable. The most recent one that's kind of, I think, interesting to look at is their mobile game, Atelier Online, Alchemist of Brazil. And I looked into it. It actually looks pretty good. It's a chibi version of the Atelier games. They put all various characters together, and it makes sense with the gameplay loop of Atelier to put it in a mobile fashion. So it actually just came out in the West. It's been in Japan for a while, but it just came out. I just saw it on Google Play, so you can download it right now if you're into it. I'm about to describe a little bit of the gameplay, because I think this is where I'm going to convince you guys. So again, I played basically all of Ryza. So I'm going to put it more in my impressions and perspective from Ryza. But I will try to generalize what these games are.
Sure.
Okay. So they are very lighthearted turn-based JRPGs. And when I mean lighthearted, there's like absolutely like, there's no darkness in there. There's no tension. It's supposed to be relaxing to play this game. And that's what it is. It's just relax. All right, let's just go through this game and just have a good time. Normally the main character, in this case Ryza, they are just like a girl or a guy from a small village, and whoop-de-doo, they end up being an alchemist. Okay. And so most of the main characters are alchemists, and then from there they use alchemy and crafting as their major system in each game. And there are companions with your main character to go along with your journey. You explore out into the world to gather materials and defeat monsters. So there's a story, of course, with each Atelier game. I feel like the stories are fine. They're not like great. I don't go there for like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing story, but it's serviceable to what the actual game is. What I really like about the loop of the game is going out, collecting materials, and the combat system itself with the monsters. So again, the combat, it's varied between each game, really. It's very diverse. And I encourage people to go out there and look for themselves for specific series. For the Atelier games, or the Ryza games, the combat is turn-based, but it has a time gauge with it. So you see actually on the left-hand screen when your characters take your turn. Very similar to like what you see in Final Fantasy 7 or 8. And basically you do basic attacks to the monster. And then from there, you fill up a gauge bar to the right. And then based off of each level of that gauge bar, you can put in more advanced and more damage attacks to the monsters. Okay. There is HP in skill points as well. And their skill points can have various skills with each of your characters as well. And you can make your characters pretty much attack, defense, or support. How you craft your character is pretty interesting, and I'll get to that later. How you craft and everything. But that's kind of the basis of the combat system. It's very fast. It's a fast-paced system. It's not meant to be very tense. You know when something is tougher in monsters, and it's like, okay, you got to get more aggressive in certain ways. But most of the time, at least for me, it's very comfortable to just press the A button. It's like, okay, just got to go through. I know what the weak points are, so on and so forth. And once you beat a monster, you get its materials. And sometimes there's rare drops if you do a little bit of a better job of beating the monster, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it sounds like they kind of, the combat that you're describing really fits in kind of with the tone of the game, where it's more of a like casual kind of like almost like not taking it too seriously kind of approach to it, where there's not like this like, you know, world-ending bad guy that you need to deal with, so they don't need to, you know, crank up the difficulty to kind of compensate for that. Like it's really just, it sounds like for the most part, you know, the combat is in service of you getting more crafting materials to then go to the alchemy part of the game. Like that's what it sounds like you're kind of describing to me. It's more of
definitely
like the combat might not even be the main kind of appeal of the game, and it might be more that the alchemy maybe is more of like, you know, the reason to play this game more than anything. That's the read I'm getting on this.
I really do like the animations of this game. It flows really well in the combat, and it's really I enjoy it very much. But yeah, you're right. Once you get a lot of materials together, I'm gonna get into a little bit of the crafting system. In terms of Ryza, there's very different variations, even in each game in this series. Like they try to experiment so much, and there's so much depth into this crafting system, but it is the most important part of the series and the games. So yeah, each game is centered around a crafting system. For Ryza, it looks like it's like a skill tree. And so what you do is like you gather enough materials from like the world, and then you just fill up like little bubbles in each of the attributes, and then it connects to another bubble where you can like fill up that gauge as well, so on and so forth, to craft your item. You have to craft everything. That includes armor, weapons, potions, bombs, even your key items, such as like a rod, a scythe, and an axe, where you actually use those tools to gather more materials. And so each of these bubbles have like some sort of quality level to it. You can have increased buffs or increased attacks or defense or various skills effects in each of these bubbles. But once you connect to the right route or whatever, you can go on to like a next skill tree where it upgrades your weapon and upgrades your key items. It gets very complex, but I think it does a very good job of introducing you originally how to get into the system. And then from there, it slowly gets more in depth as you go along.
It sounds like, especially with just trying to describe it as like this, you know, big skill tree. Like at first, like if you maybe just looked at it without, you know, knowing the concept, that might seem like really daunting, especially for someone who's, you know, never played one of these games before, like me. Like, like I remember seeing, actually, now that you're kind of describing it, I remember seeing like screenshots of kind of the alchemy tree. I'm like, what the heck is this supposed to be? and how am I supposed to navigate this? But I'm sure it makes much more sense in kind of the game. And I'm glad that it does kind of what you're talking about, where it kind of teaches you, you know, how to kind of navigate the tree and kind of deciding what to do, especially with like such a system that's like so integral to the game. Because as you mentioned, like it doesn't sound like you don't go to like an item shop or a weapon shop or anything like that. You make literally everything by the sound of it in this game. So it sounds to me, if you've ever played a game before and you've ever liked crafting, you know, I think this sounds like it's probably going to be really up your alley. Especially too if you like MMO crafting, for example. It sounds like you're probably going to be into this, or like crafting in a lot of other JRPGs as well. So
yeah, this is literally the biggest mechanic of each of the Atelier games. And I actually saw previous games before, and sometimes it's like it was nothing like a skill tree. It was like a grid system at one point where you have to match colors and everything like that. But each game really goes into the crafting system a lot. Right now, my objective is to craft powerful fishing bait with a quality level of 70. And like I have to gather enough materials to get to that point. And so like each item has like a quality level, which is like kind of a gauge of like how great that item is. So you can compare item to item pretty easily, which is really good. I think they're masters of their craft of like navigating a crafting system, automatically putting in materials in if you just need a quick craft of a bomb or something like that. Yeah, I think they do a very good job with the Atelier Ryza series. How they refined so much of it.
Well, especially like when you get to like the 21st entry, like mainline entry with Atelier Ryza, you would expect, they've probably, made it as accessible as possible. Whereas I imagine going back to some of those older PlayStation 1 games, it might be a little bit harder to kind of get back into the I would imagine like the crafting's probably a little more obtuse, a little less user friendly. Like it sounds like going back even further in the series might be too etc. But I imagine like they wouldn't release a lot of these DX versions that we're seeing on Switch or Vita if those didn't feel like they could be accessible in some way. So maybe it's okay to go back and play some of the older games in the series, even, which I guess we can't really touch on because neither of us have really played them. But I imagine they wouldn't re-release them if they weren't, accessible in some way, or if it was like was it like too clunky.
Yeah, it's very surprising how much ports and revitalization they have in their previous series. They really want to keep a lot of them current, and like they actually put in more DLC. In the most, I think it was the Mysterious series or Dust series. Yeah. Their DX versions have like extra story events and characters, and I'm like, how do they have time to like put in more material? But they do. They end up putting more stuff in there, so you get a lot of what you're getting at in those ports as well.
They are the DX versions, Garrett. It's
the DX versions.
It's the same thing that kind of Nintendo did with, Link's Awakening DX, for example. They added more than just color into that game. And you saw that with a lot of games of that era. And then they just the Atelier games just happened to take on that moniker. But, they kind of, it seems to me, at least from the outside looking in, that they've kind of, taken on more than just the name and they add a lot of content, which I think is really interesting and smart because it definitely not only gets new people like me maybe into it, but also, people who maybe have played them on PlayStation 3 or older consoles before and maybe giving them a reason to go pick them up again on Switch or Vita or whatever console you want to play them on at this point.
Right. So other than the crafting system, I want to mention that the character lines and the character events and relationships, they do a pretty good job of like expanding out what the personalities are in each of these characters, especially in Ryza. They do a lot of different side events and a lot of dialogue in these. I feel like it's almost on par with like Persona. Persona is like there's excessively a lot of dialogue, but I feel like it's almost up there in terms of just like main story events and also side events that happen in the village and also outside of it. So if you're into that type of stuff, like just expanding that type of character development, they do a very good job with that. So props to them. The last thing I want to mention is just gathering materials in general and just going through the details of it. It's a huge part of the game. A lot of the gameplay loop is, at least for me, is like going out into an area, defeating monsters, and like getting an axe, and like there's a lot of trees involved, bushes, rocks, and stuff like that. And then you get a maximum cap in your inventory, and then you have to go back and like store all those items. I'm okay with that because I don't want to like go out there forever and like not go back and do the crafting. So I'm glad there's like an inventory cap where it's, you need to go back and like at least store your items in, and then you can go back out. At least for Atelier Ryza, it's very like the navigating of the game is very nice. There's so many different fast travel like points, and you could do it any part of the game. It doesn't make you like feel like you're stuck in like a very hard area. And if you are stuck in a very like you can't defeat the monsters or anything like that, you just press like the select button and your map will pop up and you can go straight back to your base.
Okay.
And your HP and SP will heal up all the way. You'll store all the materials that you've gathered. So it's not a punishable game whatsoever. It's meant to be very relaxing. So
that's cool. Like I like that. Like in fact, I think not enough RPGs actually do that type of thing. Because I remember kind of blowing Sean's mind when he was playing Knights of the Old Republic for the first time, where like that was something you could do in that game, where you could essentially teleport back to your hideout at any time, and it would essentially just reset all of your health, and you could just teleport immediately back to where you were, and then you're kind of just picking up back where you kind of left off. Whereas I think a lot of RPGs, especially some of the more old school ones, will sometimes like trap you in dungeons in a way where like you can't really go back and heal yourself. Like Final Fantasy VII is a good example where there's one dungeon you go to, and if you're not powerful enough to defeat all the monsters and you saved inside that dungeon, like and didn't have multiple save slots, you're stuck. There's no way to leave that dungeon, and you're basically there. And you'll essentially grind out, and you'll basically have to start the game over again. So I'm glad there's a lot more flexibility there, and it kind of it again go back to kind of the tone thing we talked about before, where it's trying to be more casual. Because again, the combat it doesn't sound like the combat's really trying to burn you out or anything like that. Like that's not the point exactly. So the one thing I do have to add though, since you did mention that there are some harder areas, maybe is that is there any like grinding you have to do at all, especially for like resources in like a resource game where you're trying to get a lot of resources for alchemy and for different recipes? Like, do you have to do a lot of grinding in the game? Like, what's kind of the power progression kind of like in these games, Garrett?
I think the grinding is part of the game, to be honest with you. When I go into a new area, I try to gather materials as much as I can. And then once I hit that cap, I just go back to my base. I put the materials in, whatever I can, and then I go back out. And again, this is a fast travel system. Once you explored an area or like found it, and then you can fast travel there whenever you want. So the grinding is like, it's minimum, but like it's there. It's definitely there. I'm trying to think. Yeah, some of the downsides of these, it's kind of hard to locate exactly what items to get, especially with like what I'm doing right now. It's like, oh, I need to get this red fruit. And I'm like, okay, how do I get this red fruit? Where do I get it from? It doesn't tell you exactly where it is in like in the map or whatever. I had to like explore an area, and then it was like randomly in a crate. And I'm like, okay, so like it's kind of like hit or miss. It's definitely like an Easter egg hunt where you're trying to just gather up the materials. But once you're trying to find a specific item, it's actually a little bit more difficult to get exactly what you want. But in the end, if you're persistent, you'll definitely find all the items you could get. And you can also like look up online. It's like, hey, you just go to this area, and then I'm sure there's Wikipedias out there.
Yeah, it sounds like this is the type of game, just like, Minecraft is, for example, like where you shouldn't feel ashamed if you feel like you need to use a guide for it. Like, and to be fair, I don't really feel like, any game you really have to feel that way about. But I know some people, don't like the idea of having to use a guide if they don't want to, if they just want to tough it out. But it sounds like one of those games where it's like, it's probably, you might have a better experience if you are getting lost, maybe to kind of turn to that if you kind of need to know what to do next, kind of thing.
I kind of did that a couple of times just because I wanted to look up an item that I needed to get to progress the story. And even I didn't know this at first, actually. So your different tools, like a rod and a scythe and hammer or whatever, it actually gives you different materials once you use that on, let's say, a bush or a tree log. Like different gathering key items will give you different materials. And so I didn't know that, and I had to look. I looked it up. I was like, oh, I have to use this hammer on a tree in order to get this material down and out of the way. So
it just seems weird to me that you'd be using a big hammer on a tree as opposed to, an axe or something like that. But
you can use an axe as well. Yeah. And you actually have to make these key items as well. And that took a little bit to figure out. And once you figure out that crafting system, though, it's really satisfying. If you're into crafting, I would definitely consider looking at these series and franchise. I think the last thing I want to point out, I'm definitely into Ryza, and Ryza 2, I looked into impressions and everything. It looks like it's very similar to Ryza, only better.
Yeah.
And so like it's better in terms of navigation and exploration. With the first game, it's just like walking around. You don't really swim or whatever. But in the second game, there's definitely hooks, and like you can climb hills, and then you can go swimming. There's a lot of different variations in exploration. There's an extra side system in the crafting for Ryza 2 as well. That's what they do. They just add on top what's already good in their first game.
That's good. That's exactly what you want with a sequel in particular, too. Like, especially because in a lot of ways, especially with Ryza, it sounds like it's just the most user accessible version of the franchise, and it's probably a good way for people even to start with if they want to try the first game. Although I don't see why you would maybe play Ryza 2 without playing the first one. But that's just I think RPGs in particular, it's like I'm more hesitant to want to play the second game in a series if I haven't played the first one first. So. But yeah, that's interesting. So then, obviously, there's one question we should touch on, Garrett. Because, obviously, with 22 main endline entries in the series, it might be a little daunting for someone who's never played any of these games to know where to start. And I kind of already know what you're saying to this, but I have to ask anyways. So, Garrett, as someone who's like me, who's never played the Atelier games at all, and maybe I want to jump on board and try some of these out, and I go search Atelier on Switch and I see like 20 different things, and I'm like, I don't know which one of these I should do. Where should I start with the series?
As I think we've foreshadowed an approach to it, definitely the Atelier, the Secret series, the latest one, is the most accessible. I think this is the best they've ever been in the Atelier games, especially looking at previous games and previous impressions. I think it is fine to start with the second one. There are this Secret series is actually a unique one where there's only one other or two other series that has done this, where there's a direct sequel of characters between the first and like the second game. Normally it's a completely set of different characters and completely different set of systems and everything. But if you are starting with the second one, that's fine because it's a brand new journey. It's just that these characters have a past, and you're not going to know much about that. But if you don't care about that much, then that's okay. You can play through that game and probably have a good time. Very similar to like Witcher 3, right? Where you like, I started with Witcher 3 and I absolutely loved it, but I know there's characters in there that have a past with Geralt.
And they don't always explain that in the game, so you might miss some context and stuff like that, right? So that kind of makes sense.
So I still recommend Atelier Ryza 1 just because it's out on the latest systems. You could play on PS5 via and PS4 backwards compatible. You could play on Steam or Switch. The Switch version's totally serviceable. Like it loses its sharpness, low resolution or whatever, longer load times, but it's very stable. You can easily play on handheld. That's what I do all the time. So I definitely play on the Switch versions. But yeah, that's what I recommend.
It doesn't sound like it's like an Age of Calamity situation where the game like runs at like 20 frames per second on Switch or anything like that either.
Not even like Monster Hunter Stories 2 performance, which it was okay. Yeah, it was okay during cutscenes and combat, but when you hit into towns, it's like Chug City. Yeah. But these games, they're very simple. So they do a pretty nice on the Switch. As
Very
well.
nice. Yeah, I mean, I know that like Rise has been a game I've been kind of eyeing for a while. Because it's full price still, so I'm like, maybe I should just wait for a sale on this one. Because I see it go on sale in the States all the time, but here in Canada, it's like none of our retailers have copies, and when they do it, they're like $100. So I'm like, wait till it goes on sale.
So it is the weirdest thing that the physical versions of Atelier Ryza 1, they didn't make much physical copies of these, so it's actually quite rare to find physical copies. I got my copy of Atelier Ryza 1 digitally on Switch for $40, USD. I think I've seen it on sale a couple of times. I think the lowest I've seen is $35 or $30. I've seen it on sale as well on PSN. And I think the most recent sale on Atelier Ryza 2 as well, I think it was down 20%. So they do go on sale. I would still say wait for a sale if because I think it'll just maybe during the holidays, during Black Friday.
Yeah, well, especially with like how many games are coming out this fall and stuff like that too. But yeah. I'm excited to definitely check these out because you've definitely piqued my interest a lot more, Garrett. I was already like, this was already a series that was on my radar at least a little bit, especially because again, I really like the Fairy Tail game, and I know it's from the same developers, and I imagine a lot of the combat's going to feel similar to that game. So I'm excited to check some of these out. So I'm excited to maybe pull the trigger and maybe try some of these out at some time. I was thinking of maybe even picking up like the Dusk games when they came to Switch, because I think that was pretty recently as well.
Yes.
And it was on sale before it came out, but I never actually pick it up. So I'm going to have to do that at some point and change my mind on this. But obviously, before we move on, Garrett, I want to ask you one question as well, as someone who's been playing the Atelier games. Is that what do you think the future of Atelier kind of looks like? And as someone who's played some of these games before, what would you like to see maybe in like future installments of the Atelier games? Like, where do you want the series to maybe go from here? Especially since this series has been around forever. There's so many entries. What do you think they should do next?
That's a good question. They've been doing a very good job of their craft and like their system themselves. So I don't know how much I could recommend on the crafting side or the gameplay loop side. What I would like to recommend, it's a minor thing, but a major thing to them. I want some English voice acting. It's all still Japanese voice acting, and I don't think they're planning to make it English voice acting anytime soon, especially like how fast they churn these games out.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to see like one major game of Atelier, like just slow down a bit and really expand on one game and be really in depth with it and get some English voice acting, make it more westernized, I would say. And what I mean by that is that I would like it more open world, more lively. You definitely know what the formula is once you get into an Atelier game. It just feels like that game. And I just want it. I know it has a lot of potential being so much more if they really expanded it out. Now, that could come as a cost, right? Like their advantage is quantity with quality that's reiterating itself and being better than before, which is a really good rhythm for them. But if they stopped and really looked at the picture and the image of Atelier games and was like, we can make this like from Monster Hunter, like 3 or 4 or whatever, to Monster Hunter World, right? They made it very westernized. I think they could do the same thing with the Atelier games and make it very accessible.
Or at the very least, kind of making dubbing of the game like maybe part of the localization process, because they already have to localize all the text for North America, which I imagine is quite a laborious thing already, especially with so many like crafting menus and stuff like that. Like I can't even imagine how much work goes into that. But yeah, you're right. It'd be nice to maybe see some of that. I mean, I'm personally the type of person that I always usually prefers Japanese voices in games anyways, because I love anime and that's just my thing. But I know not everyone's like that, and I know it's a big turnoff for a lot of people if there's no English voice option in a game, especially if you're just trying to relax and stuff like that and you don't want to have to read too much. I can imagine it being a thing where people might choose not to jump into one of these games without some kind of English voice acting as an option. So yeah, I think that's like a really good observation and maybe something they could do at that point. I can't believe that they've done 22 games in this series and they haven't done that before. Like that's
I know, right?
Bizarre.
I do want to mention something that I almost forgot in the crafting system. And so once you make like armors and weapons and various items to like go with your characters, you have like 3 different attributes for each character. There's an attack, support, and defense. And so depending on what you craft for that character, it'll raise up that stat. I think that's kind of cool to see like what kind of character you're going to make with each of them. You can make a very like tanky character or a very like DPS type of character. I want them to expand a little bit more in that area, not just with like equipment and items and everything, but make it unlock skills, make it unlock classes or something like that. Make it to where you're synergizing that crafting system with your items and weapons to the point where these characters can be completely different things, like a mage or a warrior. I think that would be kind of cool as well.
Yeah, like maybe ties almost like the crafting almost acts as like a job system, kind of like what we see in like Final Fantasy or something like that. And that would be pretty cool as well. So yeah, either way, thank you so much, Garrett, for, going through the Atelier series, for planning all this out, and for educating both me and then I'm assuming a lot of the audience, especially because I know a lot of the audience is probably curious about this series. We see all these games come out and maybe we don't know about them. And I know it's a pretty niche series as well. So, I mean, it's harder for a lot of people to know whether or not they should maybe jump into one of these 12 games that pops up, on the eShop or whatever, right? So,
yeah, I do want to mention one more thing, promotionally wise. I go to the specific YouTuber for Atelier content. She is a huge fan of the Atelier games. She goes through all the DX versions, and she has a very nice 10 to 12 minute review of Atelier Ryza 1 and 2, and that is JRPG Jungle. She is, I think she's Australian or whatever, but she does a lot of JRPG content, but her emphasis is definitely Atelier games. And she goes really in depth of each game. And so if you're interested in let's say the Mysterious series or the Dust series, she's going through those games and reviewing them right now. And you can just go to her videos and she'll give you a rundown what they look like.
Nice. So, I'll actually link it up here in the cards where I'm pointing. Go look up there, and you'll actually see it on the video. If you're watching on YouTube, you can grab the link there. If not, we're going to actually put some of these YouTube channels that we've shouted out here on the show this week in the show notes as well. So if you want to check some of them out as well, definitely go do that. But Garrett, the show's not over yet, because we got one question this week in the Party Up segment, but this is not about Atelier. I tried to get Atelier questions from Donnie Reese. He wouldn't send us any. So,
guys. For the uninitiated, Donnie Reese, who is the podfather of PSVG, his favorite franchise is the Atelier series.
110%.
I give him 110%. He loves it. When you tweet out to him this RPG Cave episode, you tweet out to him and you tag him, he's gonna absolutely love it.
Yeah.
So at Eat the Hype, make sure you shout it out to him and make sure he listens to this episode, because I'm sure he'll enjoy it.
Absolutely. I mean, he'll even pull out his Vita and show you all of his Atelier games on his Vita, because he's got all of them. So I mean,
he's got all of them.
Go grab them right there. Well, anyways, Party Up, of course. If you want to be part of the show and have your question read on the show, there's a number of ways to do that. So number one, if you're watching us on YouTube and you have a question for us, you can just leave it in the comments of the YouTube video, and we will actually pick it up from there. You can also join our Discord, the Yumi and Capri Discord, which is free to join. The link is in the show notes, so just click that link, join our Discord, go to the RPG Cave section, and just leave your question, tag one of us in it, and we'll make sure to read it on the show. Or you leave a question on Twitter at Yumi Caprice on Twitter. We put up a question post every Friday. We usually also put what the topic is in the question post. So if you have a question about that topic, or even just anything about RPGs in general, definitely leave your question there as well. Just like Dan at Dano12 did on Twitter. And Dano asks the question, would you prefer to be told how many or how little hours will be needed to finish a game by the developers before a game comes out? So for me, I think that I personally would rather not be told that by the developers more than anything, because number one, I like to be surprised, but number two, I don't like to be thinking about how long the game might be before going into it, or I never factor how long a game is into my purchasing decisions, and maybe that's just part of it, because there are certain times, for example, where even though I think a game, if you just told me it was 8 hours, I'd be like, I would be thinking in the back of my mind without playing it, oh, that's really short. But when you play it, it feels like it's just the right amount of time. I really trust developers to maybe just have the game end where it feels like it should end. Obviously, there are certain games that have gone on way too longer than they're supposed to. The classic example I always use is a game like Alien Isolation, because horror games, I always say, should never be longer than 10 hours ever, because you lose the scare factor of horror games, because you become too used to the threat and the game can't really scare you anymore. Whereas Alien Isolation basically went on for 20 hours because it really should have ended halfway through where it felt like it was supposed to end, but then for some reason Sega made it they made them tack 10 more hours of gameplay on top of it.
Right.
And it just felt weird and forced. But that's not the case all the time. So that's why it's the type of thing where I'm like, no, I'd rather just know kind of when I play it, how long a game is. But what do you think about this question, Garrett?
It's a good question. Would I prefer be told by the devs? Probably not. because I don't honestly. I know they do a lot of QA and they make the game itself, but I don't truly think they know how, like for most games, how long it's going to be. Now with story narrative driven games, of course, you know how long that's going to be because that's the pacing itself. But like, let's say for an RPG, these devs have no idea. It's like, well, the main story may be 20 to 30 hours and then side and extras may be 60 hours. I don't know. But you know, to be honest with you, more recently, I've been looking into how long to beat a game. There is a website called How Long to Beat. What a lot of people do is they submit their timing, and it could be main story plus extras, fully completed. I think it just gives me a good gauge of how long a game is. And to me, time is a currency, and it's an investment. And so when I go into a game, and if I kind of enjoy it, but like do I really want to finish this game, or do I want to go through this game? Well, let's see how long it takes to beat, because there's 5 other games in the pipeline ready to go that I can play. So I actually do go to that website to see what is the estimated range people are beating these games in. So I prefer not be told by the devs, but for sure going out and seeking like a general consensus or an audience or whatever to tell me how long to beat the main story. I think that's totally fine to like gauge of like how long these games are.
Well, also too, unless the devs are really pulling for a bunch of testers or focus testers that just randomly come in and play the game for however long it takes to beat it, like. You're right. They absolutely can't really get like a good gauge on how long it takes to beat something, because a lot of times, like you'll see in interviews and devs will talk about how long their game is or how long they think it is, and a lot of times it's either shorter or longer. Usually it's like way off, or just people beat games at different paces. I mean, something Sean tells me all the time when I talk to him about how long it took me to beat a game is like he gets very surprised because when he plays the same game, it ends up taking him like sometimes like 5 or 10 more hours than it took me to finish it. Just because I think I play games just a little bit differently than maybe he does. And everyone kind of plays games a little bit differently too. So I don't even know if it's a great gauge. How long to beat though, is I think is a good resource for that, because again, it's not coming from the devs. It's coming from, people like us who play games and are just, playing it either casually or, however they point it out. And there's also like a speedrunning category there to kind of figure it out how, if you want to beat it like the absolute fastest, how long it takes to do that too. And especially in RPGs too, where it's like, especially if like the cutscenes, for example, like if the dialogue doesn't autoplay, like how it depends on like how quickly you beat the game depends on how quickly you're pressing the X button or the A button to kind of skip through the dialogue, I guess.
You can like go faster on certain battles too in certain games. You're like 3 times the speed or something like that. So
yeah, exactly.
It differentiates a lot.
For sure. Interesting question, Dano. So thank you for submitting that. And of course, again, listeners at home, let us know what you think. Also, we've been doing not a great job about this aspect, but I wanted to bring up kind of the next couple games or series we're going to talk about in the next couple episodes. So people can start thinking ahead of time of like what questions they want to ask or want to know what topics we're going to talk about on future shows. So next week, in fact, actually the next 2 weeks, Garrett, we're taking a trip to Strategy RPGville, where we're doing 2 long-running rival strategy RPG series. So next week, we're actually talking about Fire Emblem on the show. Finally, we're finally doing a Fire Emblem episode. I'm very excited about that one because I know you and I both are big Fire Emblem fans. And then the week after, get ready to learn, Garrett, because we're going to be talking about the Shining Force series, which is Sega's answer to Fire Emblem. So I'm very excited to talk about those with you. But that's the end of the show. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
I just want to say that I traded in Monster Hunter Stories 2 into GameStop today and just paid off Shin Megami Tensei 5.
Woo!
I'm so excited
it's almost
for that
here.
game.
It's almost
here. Only a few more months. So you can follow me on Twitter at Bland Explosion, and you can follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/Bland Explosion whenever I get back into streaming. You can also head over to Place of Video Games Podcast Network, where I'm the co-host of the Nintendo Shack.
Ooh, and I hear you guys have a new host. By the way, this is going up on next Saturday. You don't have to tell us who the host is, but this will be out by the time you guys probably announce that.
Oh,
Just
okay.
wanted to throw it out there. But
Yeah.
there's that. So I'm excited to hear Nintendo Shack because I don't want you to spoil for me, Garrett, as a Nintendo Shack listener who the host is.
Of
course, I know it really in the back of my mind. It's just Larrett Bland, Garrett's evil twin, the doppelganger, who's
Of
the
course.
host.
With the evil mustache.
The evil mustache. It's definitely that. So look out for Garrett on the Nintendo Shack there over on PSVG. As for me,
He hates RPGs.
you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can also find us on Twitter at Yumi Caprice. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been level 16 of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.
The RPG Cave's mana is fueled by patrons over at patreon.com/Yumi Capri. And I want to say thanks to each and every one of our Patreon supporters for all of your support throughout the years, as well as supporting our independent content. And let's start by thanking our premium producers, Dallas Ford, Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team, and Jonathan Brown. You can find his content over at youtube.com/PM Entertainment. Our platinum producers, Robbie Bobby Mailer and Trucker Sloth. And our gold members, Argo, Brendan Myers, Dallas Robbins, Emily O'Kelly, Heather Boney, James Johnson, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Benji Kong, Marcus O'Neill, RJ Kern, Dano, Skinny Matt, Mr. and Mrs. Nasty Boots, Foolish Fuji, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support.